Oh, Claudine.
Hello and welcome to Who Is Best, the show where I, Claudine, take games to give you choices and rate those choices in a tier list. One Piece is currently competing with Pokemon for most recognized IP on the planet. This Odyssey that stretches over 100 volumes of manga has entered the video game world dozens of times. But One Piece Odyssey was one of the first true attempts at an RPG. In this game, you acquire the Straw Hat Pirates to use in pretty basic turn-based combat. And that's exactly why we're here today. We're asking ourselves who is best in One Piece Odyssey. Now, a few things to note. First, we are going to heavily consider endgame, as that is where most of the challenge is found, and team composition becomes a priority. We'll still take in accessibility and usefulness throughout the playthrough, but it will be skewed to endgame. Second, there is a rock, paper, scissors mechanic in the game that determines attack effectiveness. This means that you will want a balanced team in the endgame. The three types are power, speed, and technique. Luffy, Chopper, and Sanji make up the power types. Zoro, Brook, and Nico Robin make up the technique types. And Frankie, Usopp, and Nami make up the speed types. Anyway, that's all the rules. Oh, and stick around till the end for a bonus list. Alright, let's start with the here. Usopp is an early game speed type with long range attacks that can hit outside of his area. This means that he's effective against short range enemies. Aside from that though, he'll be benched early due to lacking any real utility in the mid and late game, and comparing him with the other two speed types, Nami and Frankie, he doesn't hold a candle to their usefulness. On top of this, you'll lose access to him for a long period of time, allowing other party members to surpass him in levels. Overall, in the late and end game, Usopp won't be worth a party slot. The low tier. Sanji suffers for one main reason. He's a power type that has to compete with Luffy. Luffy isn't just the superior character in damage, but also outpaces Sanji in resistances. Since he can easily be hit with freeze, lightning, charm, or confuse, his main role as a DPS becomes obsolete in late game. His lack of a self buff also hurts him in the end. Overall, he's a below average DPS competing against one of the best characters in the game. The mid tier. Nico Robin is an average character for the first half of your playthrough, and like Usopp, she leaves the party for a long period of the mid game. But unlike Usopp, she's worth training up if you prefer her AoE damage. Robin has the best mob wiping skill in the game and is able to hit every enemy on the field. She's also pretty tanky with high defense and resistance to charm, burn, and confuse, which are some of the more common status effects. Next on the mid tier is Roronoa Zoro. Zoro is your best damage dealer among technique type characters, but unfortunately, technique types suffer against the majority of the bosses in the game. He'd be higher up on the tier list if that wasn't the case and he had a self buff like Luffy and Frankie. But despite that, he still manages to be the third best DPS in the game. The final member of the mid tier is the only true healer, Chopper. He shares the power typing of Luffy and Sanji, but unlike Sanji, Chopper's dual usefulness of damage and healing put him a tier above. For most of your playthrough, you won't need a healer as this isn't a very challenging game, but in the end game, his healing and status removal is required. Couple that with his effectiveness against many bosses in the game, and you have him capping off our mid tier. The top tier. Nami just barely made it in the top tier, as for the majority of the game, she's more like a mid to low tier character. She's weak to burn and freeze, which are two of the most common status effects in the game, and her stats are pretty bad. So why is she in the top tier, you may ask? It's simple. Her Mirage Tempo, which gives 100% evasion to a character, is an absolute necessity in the hardest battles. Her support skills in general can't really be overlooked in the endgame, as it allows your other party members to focus on damage. The final member of the top tier is the other best support character in the game, Brook. Brook is at the top of the top tier for pretty much a single skill. New World buffs the attack of your entire party and is the only team-wide attack buff in the game. On top of this, he makes for a decent attacker, especially his ability to inflict status ailments. Despite his late game recruitment, there isn't an optimal team that won't use him for his support. So he made it to the top tier. The God tier. Frankie is pretty much Luffy, but as a speed type. He has a self buff and some of the hardest hitting attacks in the entire game. Not just that, but he has resistances to most of the common status elements and the strongest single target attack. The only reason that Luffy landed above Franky on this list is due to the fact that Franky's optimal setup takes one turn. Overall, if you have Franky and Luffy as your main attackers, you can't go wrong. Luffy's main draw is that his ultimate damage setup can be obtained in a single turn with Brook's New World and his Gear 2 buff. This makes him the best damager in the game, as his power typing is ideal against the hardest enemies in One Piece Odyssey. He's also resistant to every common status element in the game, making it more difficult for enemies to disrupt his attack. And that's our list. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you to all my Patreon members, and hey, if you want to request your own list today, become a Pro Tier member for $5 a month. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you all later. Bonus round! Rating the Straw Hats from worst to best using my own subjective opinion. Brook peaks in his introduction, and his character is defined by how well you meet for a single chapter and a bunch of stupid puns. Chopper is funny, but hardly contributes anything to the Straw Hat crew. Nico Robin is fine. She's interesting because of her tie to the overarching plot of One Piece, but as a character, she's severely lacking. Also, I absolutely hate her New World design. Sanji would be lower if it wasn't for the Whole Cake Island arc. Because of the work that arc did to expanding his character, his overall appeal is much higher than I originally thought. He's had good moments throughout the story, but his ever-increasingly perviness actually hurts him more than helps. If Franky wasn't such a useful member of the Straw Hat crew, I'd have dropped him below Robin. But seeing as most of the cool stuff the crew gets to experience on the Sunny is due to his inventions, he ultimately elevates the entire crew's appeal. Zoro is such a cool character that he just has to be near the top of this list. Sure, he's not actually too deep, but his unwavering loyalty to Luffy, along with him having some of the better fights in the series, make him incredibly appealing. Usopp, in my opinion, is a severely underrated character in the Straw Hat crew. He's hilarious, and I will never get sick of him overcoming his fears. Nami is the emotional crux of the Straw Hats and ultimately the voice of reason. This is needed so much in this dynamic that she naturally gravitates to the center of any story. Luffy might be one of the best neutral arc characters in manga history. I'd say he at least ties with Kid Goku. His unwavering values and confidence give the entire One Piece story such credibility and swagger. Also, his fights are the peak of every arc without question.